Montana Territory. January 1887, the wind tore across the high plains like it meant to skin the earth itself. Brenner Hale had just unhitched his mare, snow clinging to her flanks in thick clumps, when he spotted the figure stumbling through the trees. Thin coat, dress soaked through, no horse, no hat. She looked half frozen. He dropped the reins and moved fast, boots crunching through the snow. "Ma'am," he called out. "You all right?" She turned toward him, dazed, lips cracked from cold. Her eyes were wide like she had been running for days. Her voice caught. "I need somewhere. Anywhere warm." He took off his coat and wrapped it around her before she could argue. "You found it. Come on." Her legs buckled a little as he helped her up onto the porch of his log cabin, tucked deep between the cottonwoods and the rising slopes. Once inside, he guided her to the hearth and stoked the fire higher. She sat stiffly, hands out, not speaking for a long moment. Brenner kept his distance, giving her time, but he watched her. She was maybe 23, 24, younger than him by a few years. Dirt crusted her skirt hem. Her boots were worn clear through at the toes. "I'm Brenner Hale," he said finally, voice low. She blinked, then looked up at him like she was seeing him clearly for the first time. "Naomi Orwin." "Where are you coming from?" "North," she said. "I left 3 days ago, the wagon. It broke near Fort Benton. I kept walking. Alone. My husband died last spring, consumption." Something in her tone made him wince. He didn't press further. "You got family out this way?" he asked. "No," she whispered. "I was headed to a cousin in Helena. But I do not think I would have made it another night." He nodded. "You are safe now." She stared at the fire like she did not believe it yet. Over the next hour, he brought her dry clothes, his sister's old dress, packed away in the chest in the loft. She changed behind the screen near the bed, and when she stepped out, she looked different. Still pale, still tired, but her shoulders were straighter. "Thank you," she said, eyes meeting his. "I do not know what I would have done." "You do not owe me anything, Naomi." But something passed between them in that moment, like the storm outside had slowed, just for a breath. That night, he gave her the bed and took the cot by the cold wall. She tried to protest, but he just pulled the blanket over his chest and said, "Do not argue. You need the rest." The next morning, the snow was deeper. No signs of it letting up. Naomi helped with breakfast, quiet but steady. She moved like someone used to tending others. When he asked, she told him she had grown up on a farm near Topeka. Said she had been married at 19. No children. "Did you love him?" Brenner asked without looking at her. He was chopping wood on the porch, and she had followed him out with a scarf wrapped around her hair. "I tried," she said. "But he was not kind." He paused mid-swing. "I am sorry." She gave a small shrug. "I stayed because I thought it was what I was supposed to do." Brenner did not say anything to that, just split another log and handed it to her. They spent the next 2 days snowed in. Naomi read from the old books on his shelf. She asked about the carved wooden animals lined up on the mantel. He told her his father had made them before he died in a mining accident. She asked if he had ever been married. "No." "Why not?" He looked at her then. Really looked. "I guess I was waiting." She did not respond, but her cheeks flushed, and she turned back toward the fire. By the 4th day, the storm broke. The sky cleared to a hard, bright blue. Brenner saddled his mare and offered to ride into town to send a wire to her cousin in Helena. "I think I have already found where I need to be," she said softly. He stopped cold. "What do you mean?" She took a step closer. "You offered me shelter when you did not have to, Brenner, and I have not felt this safe in years." He exhaled slowly. "Naomi, I am not asking for anything you are not ready to give." He reached for her hand. "What if I am ready?" She blinked up at him, tears welling. "Then I think I would like to stay." That night he kissed her for the first time, not rushed or hungry. Just quiet and sure, like he had been waiting for the right moment and knew it had come. The next morning he made coffee while she stirred the cornbread batter. Her hair was loose, her eyes soft. Something had shifted between them, something solid. He looked over the table at her. "You said you came here looking for shelter." "I did." He reached across and took her hand. "I think maybe I found more than I expected, too." Naomi smiled, and it reached all the way to her eyes. "A partner for all seasons?" she asked. "That is what I am hoping for." By late February, the drifts along the ridge had melted into crusted humps, exposing the dark earth beneath. Brenner's land ran long along a shallow creek, and each morning Naomi walked its edge, gathering dry branches and watching the thaw work its way along the banks. She'd taken to wearing one of his old flannel shirts belted over her skirts when she worked outside. He never commented on it, but he always watched her from the barn a little longer than he meant to. That morning, she came in with a bundle of kindling tucked under her arm and a line of frost along her lashes. Brenner was kneading dough at the table, sleeves rolled high, hands dusted in flour. "You ever think about planting something in that patch near the fence?" she asked, setting the wood by the hearth. He looked up. "Tried beans once. The soil's rocky. Could be turned with ash and manure. Might take a season or two, but it'd come around." He wiped his hands on a cloth. "You got a mind for growing. I helped my mother keep a garden from the time I could hold a spade. Didn't have much choice." He leaned against the counter. "You miss Kansas?" She sat down across from him, smoothing her skirt. "I miss the smell of fresh cut alfalfa." But not the rest. The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was full in a different way, like two people learning where the edges of each other sat. Later that day, they rode out together to check the fence line along the south pasture. Naomi rode behind him, arms snug around his middle. Her cheek rested just below his shoulder blade, and he could feel the steady measure of her breath against his back. When they reached the far gate, she dismounted first, boots sinking into the mud. She bent to inspect a post leaning out of the frost-softened ground. "This one's gone slack. I'll come back with a new corner brace." She tilted her head at him. "You always fix things as soon as you spot them, soon as I can. Letting things sit tends to make 'em worse." She straightened and wiped her hands on her skirt. "You're not like most men I've known." He didn't answer right away. Then, "I'd like to think I've learned from what I've seen." That night, Naomi opened the cellar for the first time and took stock of what was there. She called out to him from the top step while he washed up at the basin. "Did you know you've got 3 jars of preserves so old the labels are gone?" "I figured they'd find their way out on their own if they were meant to." She laughed, then a warm, surprised sound he hadn't heard from her before. It settled somewhere in his chest and stayed there long after the sound faded. The next morning she woke him before sunrise. Her fingers touched his shoulder gently. "I want to make soap. You have lye, and I saw some tallow in the shed." Brenner sat up slowly. "That's something you enjoy. It's something that lasts." By midday, the scent of rendered fat and lye drifted out the open windows. Naomi stirred with a long wooden paddle, hair tied back, sleeves damp to the elbows. Brenner watched her hands move, careful and sure. "You ever think about building onto the cabin?" she asked without looking at him. Wasn't much reason till now. She didn't smile, but her eyes flicked toward him. "A root cellar built proper. Maybe a smokehouse. I've got some stone I can haul up from the creek." They worked side by side the rest of the afternoon, and when evening came they sat on the porch, mugs of coffee cooling in their hands. A coyote called from somewhere beyond the trees. Naomi spoke first. "I used to think I was made for quiet living. Now I'm not so sure." Brenner turned toward her. "What do you think now?" "I think I'm still learning who I am when I'm not afraid." He reached for her hand. "That woman, whoever she becomes, she's welcome here." She leaned her head against his shoulder. I'd like to build something with you, something that doesn't come undone easy." His thumb traced the back of her hand, slow and steady. "Then we'll build it. One piece at a time." By early March, the days stretched longer and the ground held the warmth of sun a little longer each afternoon. Naomi stood behind the cabin, sleeves rolled, nails packed with soil, coaxing life from fallow earth. Brenner watched her from the barnyard, one hand resting on the gate, the other gripping a feed sack. He didn't say anything, but she felt his gaze like a steady presence. That evening, she rinsed her hands at the pump and leaned on the handle, breath rising in faint clouds. "You ever think about hiring a hand?" she asked without turning. "I've managed alone since my brother passed," he said, "but I've thought about it more now." She straightened and looked over at him. "Not just for work, I mean. Someone to keep an eye on the place if we ever need to leave it for a stretch." He nodded slowly. "You thinking of going somewhere? Not far, just maybe to Helena come summer. I'd like to see the cousin I never reached. Let her know I'm all right. Maybe bring her some of the soap once it's cured." He stepped toward her, boots sinking into the damp ground. "I can come with you." She smiled, faint and thoughtful. "I'd like that." Inside, she stitched new curtains from muslin she'd found in a buried crate beneath the loft stairs. She didn't tell Brenner, just hung them one afternoon before he came back from the ridge. When he stepped through the door and saw them, he paused just inside the threshold. "Feels like a home now," he said, voice low. She kept her eyes on her needle. "It already was. This just makes it easier to see." They shared the bed now, without fanfare. It began with her falling asleep beside the hearth one night and him gently lifting her, laying her down beneath the quilt without waking her. She stayed the next night, and the one after that. Now, her head rested on his shoulder each morning and his hand found hers before either of them spoke. One morning, she ran her fingers over the scar on his upper arm, faded and jagged. "How long ago?" she asked. 6 years. Colt misfired while I was clearing brush. Took a chunk of flesh and near took my nerve." She traced the ridge with care, her touch feather light. "You still carry the ache in the cold, sometimes in the rain." She leaned in and kissed the spot. "You're not the only one with old wounds." He didn't ask where hers were. He didn't need to. The next week, a rider came down the ridge with a sack of seed potatoes and a letter from the general store in town. Brenner traded half a sack of oats and a coil of rope for it. Naomi took the paper gently, read it once, then tucked it into a drawer beside the ledger. "She's well," Naomi said. "My cousin. She remarried, runs a boarding house now." Brenner watched her face carefully. "You thinking of joining her? I thought I might be when I first set out, but that's not my path anymore." He nodded and reached for her hand. "Ours runs different." They planted the potatoes under a pale sky streaked with pink. Naomi worked with her sleeves tied above the elbow, and Brenner followed with the rake, smoothing each row. They didn't speak much, but their movements matched measured, unhurried, certain. That night after supper, Naomi pulled a small wooden box from beneath the bed. She opened it on the table between them. "These were my mother's," she said, lifting out a pair of bone-handled scissors and a scrap of lace. He looked at the items, then at her. "You've kept them safe a long time. They're part of what made me. I want to keep them here." He didn't touch the box, only said, "This is your place now, Naomi. You don't have to ask." She closed the lid softly. "I know." Later, as the fire burned low and wind moved through the trees like a whisper, Brenner turned to her in the quiet. "If I build a second room come spring, it won't be for guests." Her eyes found his in the half-light. "What will it be for?" "Whatever life we make together." She reached for his hand, threaded her fingers through his without hesitation. "Then let's make it wide enough for all we'll grow into." And outside, the first buds had started to show on the cottonwoods, small and stubborn and full of promise. By late March, the ground softened enough that Brenner began digging the footings for the new room. He worked with a post-hole digger and spade, shoulders braced against the stubborn clay. Naomi marked the corners with twine and stakes, measuring each side twice with a carpenter's rule she'd found in a box of old tools beneath the feed bins. "You ever build a room from the ground up?" he asked, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. "No," she said, stepping around the line to check the square. "But I've seen it done, and I know how to follow a plan." He looked at her for a moment. "You want to draw it out?" she nodded, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I've got something in my head, not just walls. A place to sit when the weather turns, shelves for books and jars, a window that catches the evening light." They worked in tandem, each movement purposeful. She carried stones from the creek while he set the first beams. The rhythm of it settled into their days, hammering, hauling, leveling. They didn't rush one morning. Naomi came down the ladder with a pencil between her teeth and a rolled sheet of paper in her hands. "I've been thinking about a stove in the new room," she said, unrolling the sketch on the table. "Not for cooking, just for warmth." He studied the lines she'd drawn. "You got a good hand. My father used to draw barn layouts when the winter kept him inside." I'd sit beside him with charcoal and copy the lines. He tapped the corner of the page. "We'll need to find brick. There's a kiln south of town. If we trade the extra sacks of rye, we could get enough." Brenner nodded. "We'll ride down on Thursday. Take the wagon." Their trip to the kiln took most of the day. The road was still soft from the thaw, and the wagon wheels sank deep in places. Naomi sat beside him, gloved hands resting in her lap, eyes scanning the horizon. "You ever think about what this land looked like before fences and cabins?" she asked. He glanced at the open plains. "Sometimes. I found arrowheads near the northern edge last spring." She turned toward him. "You keep them?" "In a box under the floorboards." "Didn't feel right to throw them out." She studied his face. "You ever meet anyone whose people were here before?" He nodded once. "There's a man named Elijah who comes through from the Groves Venter, trades pelts for cornmeal and salt." "Doesn't say much." "I'd like to meet him." Brenner looked over at her. "I think he'd respect you." They returned with the bricks stacked high in the wagon bed, lashed down with rope. Naomi covered them with burlap to keep the road dust off. That night, Brenner lit a lamp while Naomi brushed her hair near the hearth. The fire burned low, casting long shadows across the floor. "I had a dream last night," she said without turning. "I was standing in a field of sunflowers. And you were there, holding a basket of eggs." He leaned back in the chair. "I don't recall dreaming anything near so pleasant." She smiled faintly. "It wasn't the place I grew up. The air smelled different, but it felt like mine." "Maybe it was." She set her brush down. "You believe in that? A place calling to you from somewhere you ain't been yet." "I believe in finding peace where it grows." They didn't speak after that. She came to him and rested her head on his chest, and he wrapped his arms around her. The silence between them wasn't empty. It was rooted. By April, the walls of the new room stood chest high. Naomi pressed her palm into the wet mortar between the stones of the stove base. "This part's mine," she said. "When it dries, it'll hold my hand forever." Brenner crouched beside her and pressed his hand next to hers. "Then it'll hold mine, too." They stood together, fingers marked in stone, and watched the light shift through the rafters. The wind moved soft across the hills. Nothing rushed, nothing undone. By mid-April, the frame of the new room had taken shape. Rafters notched and pinned with care, the floorboards laid tight across hand-hewn joists. Brenner had worked slow but steady, never rushing a cut, never trusting a beam until it settled right under weight. Naomi followed behind with oil and cloth, sealing the wood and testing the windows for draft. That morning, she stood just inside the new threshold, barefoot, her hem brushing sawdust as she turned a small clay pot between her hands. Inside it, tiny green shoots had begun to press through the soil. "You think they'll take root in here?" she asked. "They will," he said, setting down his level. "They've got everything they need." She rested the pot on the sill and leaned her hip against the frame. "I used to think I was like one of these, something that needed shelter to grow. But I don't think that's quite right." Brenner looked up, brushing hair from his brow. "What do you think now?" "I think I was always strong enough. I just needed space to stretch." She didn't wait for him to respond. She turned and crossed the room, her feet silent on the new boards, and reached for his hand. "You gave me that." He held her fingers a moment, then kissed her knuckles, rough from work, warm from the spring air. "You gave it back." Later that week, Naomi rode into town for the first time since the storm, sitting tall on Brenner's mare, her shawl tied tight against the wind. He walked beside her, leading the wagon. When they reached the post office, she stepped down and handed over a folded letter sealed with wax. "It's for my cousin," she said, "telling her I won't be coming after all, not because I'm lost, because I'm found." He didn't answer, just touched her back as they stepped inside the mercantile. Inside, she bartered for beeswax and a length of ticking cloth, speaking soft but firm. Brenner waited by the shelves, watching her move through the space like she belonged in it. "You planning something?" he asked when they stepped back out into the sun. She tied the cloth bundle tight. "A mattress for the new bed. I want it to feel like it was always meant to be there." They rode home in silence, the wagon creaking, birds calling sharp from the cottonwoods. That evening, Naomi sat cross-legged on the floor of the new room, stuffing the ticking with dried grass and washed wool. Brenner crouched beside her, threading twine through the edges to close the seams. "You ever think about what we'll do when the harvest comes?" she asked. "I thought I might build a press, try for cider." She looked up at him, eyes warm. "And after that, whatever we want. Smoke meat. Save seeds. Trade enough to buy a milk cow." Naomi reached over and brushed a curl from his forehead. "You speak like this land is already ours." "It is," he said simply. "We just had to grow into it." That night, they laid the new mattress on the fresh-hewn frame and sat side by side as the fire cast flickering shadows against the wall. Naomi reached into her apron and pulled out a small carved figure, a deer, worn smooth. "It belonged to my brother," she said. "He died when I was 16. I've carried it ever since." Brenner took it carefully. "You sure you want to leave it here?" She nodded. "It's time." He set it on the shelf above the stove beside the pair of handprints in stone. Weeks passed. The garden sprouted thick with greens and tubers. The stove in the new room burned hot through the last of the cold nights. Naomi began weaving a rug from scraps of cloth, each strip a memory: her mother's apron, a piece of Brenner's old shirt, a sleeve from the dress she'd worn that first frozen night. One morning, Brenner stepped out with his rifle and came back with a wild hen, feathers ruffled but clean. Naomi plucked it on the porch, humming under her breath while he sharpened the blade. "We should have folks over," she said, "when the room's finished. Let them see how a life can turn. You think people will come all the way out here?" "I do. Folks follow light." He looked at her then, long and full. "You're the brightest thing I ever found." She touched his face, fingers lingering at his jaw. "Then stay with me, every season, every turning. There's nowhere else I'd ever go." They married in late May, under the cottonwoods, with the sun overhead and the creek running high. Elijah came, offering a bundle of sweetgrass, and Naomi laid it in the fire. Brenner placed a silver ring on her finger, hammered from a coin his father had carried during the war. They danced barefoot in the new room with the windows open, and the scent of fresh bread rising from the oven. At dusk, as the last guests rode off and the lanterns flickered low, they stood in the doorway looking out over the land. "I was never meant to pass through," Naomi said. "I was meant to put down roots." Brenner wrapped his arms around her, resting his chin on her shoulder. "And I was meant to grow beside you." They built the rest together, a smokehouse by the ridge, a henhouse near the back gate, a bench beneath the window where Naomi sat to write letters in the evening light. They pressed cider in the fall and traded it for flour and bolts of cloth. When the first snow came, they stacked wood high and stayed inside, wrapped in quilts, the fire steady, their hands always finding each other in the dark. Years passed. The garden grew deeper, the shelves fuller. Children came one then another. Laughter echoed through the rooms they'd shaped with their own hands. And still, each night, they lay side by side, the weight of the past behind them, the warmth of their love carrying forward. Together they weathered every season. Never rushed, never undone. Just steady and sure, and always home.